Lawn Solutions Australia is bringing the world's leading turf varieties to both your local golf course and home lawn. With superior turf varieties like Tiff Tough Hybrid Bermuda, Sir Grange Zoysia and the newly launched Zoysia Australis, available exclusively through Lawn Solutions Australia, we have the perfect lawn for you. For more information or to find your local accredited supplier, visit lawnsolutionsaustralia.com.au. That's lawnsolutionsaustralia.com.au. Hello and welcome to episode 126 of The Thing About Golf, Golf Australia magazine's continuing exploration of just what it is that draws people to this game. Rod Morrie's my name, and like many of you, golf for me is and has been a lifelong recreation and passion. All over the world, millions of people just like us take unfeasible amounts of joy from the simple act of hitting a ball with a stick into a distant hole. But the ball we hit and the stick we use to do it with are part of an industry, because more than just a pastime, golf is a business. Which begs the question, as a business, how does golf stack up in the world of sport? What are the similarities? Where does golf differ? To answer these questions, you'd need to talk to a sports business expert, and that is exactly what we're doing on this episode. Richard Gillis is an English journalist, author and entrepreneur who launched the sports business podcast network Unofficial Partner in 2019. Unofficial Partner covers all sports and all aspects of the sports business, and recently they launched a monthly dedicated golf business podcast called Wedge Issues. We chat about that as part of a broader discussion touching on media, the live golf disruption, the future of sport on television, and much, much more. Richard is articulate and thoughtful, and I hope that you enjoy his musings as much as I did. Well, it's a real honour and a bit of a privilege and a real joy. Someone I've been looking forward to chatting to on this podcast for quite some time. Richard Gillis from the Unofficial Partner, sports business expert. And as I learned to my surprise a couple of weeks ago listening to one of the episodes of his podcast, a man who loves golf. Richard Gillis, we appreciate you taking some time on The Thing About Golf. I know it's a commitment, but I think this is going to be an enjoyable chat.
Oh, well, I take that for granted, Rod.
We've had one or two, haven't we? I don't think too many have gone the other way. Podcast is called The Thing About Golf. It is our jumping off point. What's the thing about golf for Richard Gillis? I assumed you'd come to golf as a bit of an through sort of business and professional golf and covering the game, but you revealed on the latest issue of one of your golf breakout podcasts we're going to talk about shortly, Wedge Issues, that you love the game. I didn't know that. What's been your relationship with golf? Where did it start and where does it stand?
Oh man, I don't know, where do you start? I think it was, we're now talking a long time ago, teens,
Yep.
Early teens. So it was cricket, and then via cricket into, which is not a happy transition swing wise, but into golf. And then so sort of when you're in your teens, and it was local municipals. I grew up in West London, and for some reason, which is I've never quite found the reason, there is a lot of public courses in that bit of town. So I was, we were just mucking about. We never joined a golf club. It was all, muni golf. And I just always loved it. So it was always a sort of, the television wise, it was, Peter Alice, Seve, Faldo, all of that, Lyle. You can imagine staying up watching the Masters, in the 80s when British players were winning, and it's such a cliche now because that's just such an obvious route. But that was exactly the route I took, and I still watch Faldo now. I mean, having met these people and over the years and interviewed quite a few of them, you never lose that sort of, with golf, it's different. You do lots of different sports, but golf is just a different thing for me. It's personal.
And they're so individual, aren't they? As a sport itself, as a fan, you're attached to a particular player. So there's a real worship factor there. You can love a soccer player when he plays for your team, but you're quite entitled to hate him if he goes to another team. Doesn't happen with golf, does it? It's a lifelong commitment.
It is a lifelong commitment. Yeah. And it's a peculiar relationship because they, as you say, some of them are quite odd people, and they're quite, in many ways, they're just unusual. They don't. And I'm talking about probably, you got to be careful not to sound too old, but there is a sort of generation where it was less varnished, less sort of PR'd, and we're talking about a sort of time when they weren't perfectly presented. So this is a pre-Tiger Woods sort of era, when that whole sort of the marketing of golf became an industry in its own right. But there's a sort of period which I've got a lot of fondness for, which is just a lot of them were quite peculiar, odd people,
characters,
angry people. Were, and golf television, because you're watching it for so long, you can't
hide it for that long, can you?
Brand to the world for that length of time.
Which is the potential issue with these featured groups we see now, where they follow the players every shot, every hole. You get to see a bit of stuff go on there that you don't normally on the coverage. What you've outlined there, Richard, is it's a proper start in golf, isn't it? It's not country club. It's not golf membership and handicaps and all of those sorts of things. I wonder whether you're in the majority, perhaps, of those who would call themselves golf fans, whose relationship with the game is not as formal as membership and a weekly Saturday tea time and all those things which I've done and a lot of club members in Australia would recognise. That's a different way. Do you think, is there a difference between those two fans, you and the guy who turns up every Saturday morning at 8:30 to play with Jim and Steve and Bob, and that's his sort of routine in life? Are they different golf fans? Is there a different feel about the game? Are you hooked on the sensation of a good shot? Are you addicted to the game in that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things there. One is, I think that you always felt like you were on the outside, because there was this game that people talked about, about their club, and they talked about handicaps, and we never had a handicap. You could never get a handicap because you weren't a member of a club.
That's right.
So straight away, there's a whole sort of, you're not in the inner sanctum. So you always felt a bit, distanced from it. And the language of the whole thing about, sort of just memberships and committees and, being and rules and all of this stuff that we didn't really know. And I used to devour golf magazines and Golf World, Golf Monthly, all of the the classics, and you just felt like, okay, I love playing this game, but there's something else happening here that I'm not involved in. I don't go and play on a Saturday. I can never get on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning, So this idea that you're going to go and do a medal, and I never knew what a medal was. So it was sort of, well, it sounds like just and I assumed, because I'm English, everything is about class. I assumed it was a class thing. So everyone, so you had Peter Alliss on the telly, who actually isn't as posh as I used to think, but presented a whole world of club golf, the 19th hole, all of those sort of tropes, which I just never got anywhere near. We just used to turn up, play, queue up, play, and absolutely loved it and watch it on telly and the rest of it. But it wasn't, the rest of it just passed me by. It's only the last few years really that I've joined a golf club, that you sort of get the rest of the experience.
You're in the demographic now, Richard. It's time. You need to come on board. Become one of us. Join a golf club.
I've grown up.
Become a member.
Finally, I've made it.
There's an innocent joy to the golf you're describing, which it feels to me, and I think golf does this in other areas too. You're right about that sort of exclusivity. Golf does it. It really exudes that to its own demise in many ways, to its own detriment in many ways, as we've talked about before with image and whatnot. But there's a real innocence to the way you're going about it. Once you join that club thing, I'd be interested in your take. Little bits of that get sapped away, don't they? Little bits of the childlike joy of golf, the four mates at the age of 14 out on a fairway, miles from a road or any adults, mucking around, hitting driver off the deck, who can cut it round the tree, who can putt it through the bunker. That all disappears when you formally join the golf family in some ways, doesn't it?
I guess so. I mean, I sometimes say when I'm, and to be honest, I'm still playing golf with the blokes I used to play with when I was 14. So, it's a sort of, and in some ways, I quite often think I've never got over the thrill of finding a Titleist Pro V1 in the rough. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It's like there is nothing. In fact, I think I prefer that to golf.
It's universal.
It's the sheer excitement. It's like, it's like you talk about sort of just innocence, but I can afford a Titleist now, and I'm still really excited to find one. When I tread on one, yes, I've got one.
Going for one.
And that bit of it, and the mucking about on a sort of an evening, going over the golf club and just finding stupid games to play with your mates. I think that's a lot of it. I think a lot of sport is just people, we really overthink and overplay lots of things about sports role in society, and you can do degrees and PhDs in it now. And actually what it's about is friendship a lot of the time. And it's sort of finding something to do with your mates.
Yeah. And that whole notion of golf being an old man sport, I think that's what that is. I looked to my own club that I used to be a member at, and the blokes I played with, they were retired panel beaters, mechanics, farmers, and they all played golf and they all enjoyed the game. But it wasn't why they turned up every Wednesday and Saturday. They turned up to play with their mates. And that becomes kind of important later in life, particularly for blokes. We have men's sheds here in Australia, but blokes who've retired, have done nothing but work all their life. They're at home for a week before the wife says, that's enough, get out and find something to do. Golf can be that for a lot of people, I think, particularly if you played younger in life. Not uncommon for people to play as teenagers, take the 20s and 30s off and do kids and careers and those sorts of things. In the 40s, bit more time, bit more disposable income, join a club, become a proper golfer, having played your whole life. Are other sports like that, Richard, or is that unique to golf in some way? The model is different, isn't it? You don't get that in, well, maybe you do get it a bit in cricket, but you don't see that sort of football or the team sports that I think about. Something unique about that relationship, I feel. There
is something odd about it. I mean, it might just be a numbers thing. There just might be more people doing it. Sometimes you sort of talk to people on the golf side, when you're in the social aspect is underplayed and actually is a massive plus for golf, which they probably don't make enough of. And, because people lapse very quickly into the sort of golf club member cliche of, it's male, old blokes. And there is a bit of that, but there's also an element to it, which I think is underplayed, which is actually there aren't many places that blokes go and congregate together. And one of the problems we've got, without bringing your podcast down, is it's when you get to, when men get into their 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s, it can be very lonely for them because they haven't cultivated friendships in the same way. And golf clubs and cricket clubs and sports clubs generally are a way of doing that. It's easy to take the piss out of them because, and people say, oh, you're going to the golf club, and they've got this idea in your head about, sort of wearing +4s and a monocle. But actually it's just somewhere where men, and I'm talking about men because I think women's social groups are different. They're much more cultivated actively, and this is a research group of one, but I do think there's something in it, and I do think that golf clubs provide a service, and they wouldn't do it overtly because I don't think that's how men want to be perceived. No. But I do think it is something in there that I think that's what's happening.
Yeah, men. This is on a bit of a rabbit hole, but you'll appreciate this. It speaks to the same thing. You might remember this. I'm going to say in the late 90s, Precept came out with a ball called the Precept Lady, targeted at women's golfers. And a few senior elite amateur players, guys in their 50s who played in the US Amateur and those sorts of things, really good players, twigged that this ball was a bit soft and was really good. And a bunch of them started to use it quietly. Nobody would say that they were using a Precept Lady. A little bit like the Pro V1 seam thing that everyone started to buy. It caught on. And this became the cult ball of choice over the period of a few months among these sort of senior players. And still nobody would admit that they were using a Precept Lady, When it finally sort of came out, I'd written a story about it, a few others had written a story about it. Precept decided that the stigma of it being called lady was a problem. So they created the Precept Laddie, and both disappeared within a year. So sort of tells you about blokes and how you market to them in some ways. We'll move off you in a second. What sort of standard do you play at? People want to know what your handicap is. Well, actually, I want to know what your handicap is, and somebody else might as well.
Okay, so that is a very difficult question for me because I've been But I'm the straight answer. My club handicap at the moment is, I think, 13 something.
Welcome aboard. Right in that meaty part of the curve there, Richard. Well done.
Exactly. Exactly. Just aspiring. I know and there are times when I walk off and think, okay, well, I've got it now. I've cracked it now. Yeah. I understand.
5, here I come.
On
my way. Yeah.
And then I'm looking over the out of bounds. But there's a sort of it's really frustrating. And I would argue more frustrating than most people. All golfers say they're frustrating, but I have, because I played periodically and over sort of, it's only the last sort of few years where I've now started to play properly, as in more regularly, with a bunch of blokes at East Brighton. I live in Brighton, down on the south coast, so we play at East Brighton, and it's only then that I've actually now started to play more regularly and got into it. So I was always sort of one of those blokes who said, I'll play off 18, and then I could go round in sort of 82, or I could go around in the 102. It's one of those stupid things.
Yeah, indeed. Well, mate, good to have you aboard. Welcome to Clubland. Golf, of course, isn't just a recreation. It's a business. And sport business broadly is your business. There's a bunch of things I want to talk to you about. Some of it about media and some of it about sport generally and some of it about golf. But give us a thumbnail sketch, because you cover all the sports, unofficial partner. People who are interested, the podcasts are fantastic if you're interested in sport business, as is the newsletter that Richard does every week. But on that global sort of ladder of sport, we're talking to professional golf now, which is a completely separate game in so many ways. Where does golf sit sort of globally? It's Premier League and F1 and that whole big pot of sports that we all know sort of exists. What's golf's place in that as a business?
It's got a significant place because it's one of relatively few sports that are played around the world and in the US. So, and obviously the part of the golf conversation is the, US centric nature of the whole thing about the majors and the tours and the rest of it. But actually that bit of it is quite unusual. Obviously, I'm sitting here in England, and the Premier League is just a commercial monster, and crowds out lots of other sports, in terms of when you look at sport. And the bit that I focus on, and it is a bit of an unusual niche, and it's one that sort of stumbled into. But I used to think I knew what sport was. I used to be a sports fan. Cricket, football, rugby. I used to watch anything, and golf, obviously. And then I started working on the business side, and I sort of thought, well, actually, I didn't know what was going on at all. There's a market here. I didn't know what was being sold and what was being bought and the rest of it. And once you get your head around that, and you realise that actually they are a series of things that are being sold, and you then look at who's buying and why are they buying, it becomes much simpler. But it also, to answer your question, golf has a really significant presence in the sports business because it's popular with broadcasters, it's popular with sponsors, and it has a particular difference in the marketplace for sport and entertainment. And we can talk about why that is, but there is a sort of, it might be to do with the audience, the sophistication and the wealth, frankly, of the people who are watching. So they're an attractive audience, but it also takes a bloody long time. And so broadcasters quite like it because it pads out. Otherwise, in the era of pay television and 24-hour sports channels, golf's a useful asset because it means that you've got stuff going on all the time, So it plays different roles in different parts and to different industries. And it's quite sort of, it just depends on when you then say, right, how does it compare? It compares well. There is a lot of money, and there's also an increasingly, and we'll probably talk about it, there's a lot of money looking to be invested in golf.
Yeah, interesting. So that sort of model that you've described there, does golf punch above its weight commercially, I guess, is the sense, given the numbers? So if you talk about Premier League or NFL in the US, the fan base is staggering. You almost can't comprehend the numbers. I feel like golf doesn't have sort of one place that's the US doesn't all watch golf; they all watch NFL. Do you know what I mean? So does it punch above its weight commercially in some senses? Because I can't imagine the numbers for golf are as big as those others, and yet I feel like the product they sell is perhaps valued higher. Does that make sense?
It's certainly. I mean, if you look at the television rights, and I haven't got the PGA Tour's rights on the top of my head, but if you add up the goal, if you look at the sport and say, right, well, what is it selling? What's the value of golf? You would then go to, okay, what does the media rights, so what television essentially pays, sponsorship, so what the brand marketing community pays towards golf. And then you've got a whole load of other sort of areas. And in golf, you've got tourism. So the tours are sustained by people paying for the events to come to them. So again, that's an area that other sports probably don't access. So you've got sort of some very considerable buckets of money that are there to be sort of spent, and golf is a useful way of doing it, and they compare very favourably. Yeah. So the question, or if you wanted to put a challenge into it, and the worry that not just golf but sport has generally in terms of at the professional end as a media entity, are we going to be watching golf in the same way, and therefore is television going to be paying the same amounts for golf over the next 20 years as it has over the last 20 years? And we can have a right old row about whether that's going to be the case, and we can sort of argue the case. And there is a sort of almost existential worry about the sports media rights marketplace. And that's a particular part of the sport business conversation, because it's so central. It's the engine of it's where a lot of the money has come from over the last.
We're on the cusp of the future
years.
In that industry, aren't we? Broadcasting and sport and those kinds of things. You mentioned broadcasters love golf because it takes up 8-hour chunks of 4 days in a row, and if you're trying to fill a schedule, that's fantastic. But it in fact turns out that generationally, it looks like there might not be a customer for that product in the not too distant future. Roger Mitchell came up with the idea, another sports business sort of analyst, that golf really should be 4-minute highlights of the back nine Sunday. That's really all people want, the first 3.5 days. Do you agree with him about that, firstly? And is that how long before that plays out? We already see the issues in the US, particularly with the streams moving from one provider to another. Fans can't keep up. They've got to change channels to follow the golf. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on that's in real turmoil, that broadcast industry. So can golf in particular, which like test match cricket requires 4 days to play out, does it survive in that landscape? It feels like television money is going to stop funding a lot of sport, and golf might be pretty vulnerable in that way.
I think there is a sort of the nightmare scenario. I know Roger very well, and he's very good at articulating the nightmare scenario. Now,
yes,
that, and that I think you have to then counter that. That's a sort of extreme solution. I don't think that the money might go down, and golfers might have to. We're talking over a 20-year horizon here, and we'll ignore Saudi for a minute, and we'll ignore other pots of money and other ways in which the money. If we're worried about Rory McIlroy's prize pot, if that's the question, there are other ways in which that money might get replaced. But to an extent, the broadcast, if the broadcast is the question, yes, there are significant questions in terms of, is it still worth Sky, NBC, whoever, the Golf Channel, paying large, big, signing big checks and taking all of the risk? So the risk that they have is that, okay, I'm going to pay the European Tour or the PGA Tour or the R&A or the USGA. I'm going to write them a big check for 3 years, 5 years of rights. And then I'm going to go and see if I can make back that check by selling advertising or just commercializing my channel. It gives me something to sell for that period of time. That's always been the exchange, the value exchange. Now, it's obvious that our kids are not watching television in the same way as we did. But I do think they're consuming golf. They're consuming it in lots of different ways. And the job of the next sort of period is to work out, well, okay, if you are the European Tour, if you are the PGA Tour, if you are the R&A, what's the commercial model? And to an extent, Roger's right that there's going to have to be a calibration on the cost side. So in football, the players probably, or below the absolute best players, are probably going to have to take a pay cut. Golfers, how many golfers really sell tickets? How many golfers really sell subscriptions?
What do you reckon the number?
And this is what Live's about. This is what the Super League's about.
Yep.
The money wants best versus the best on a regular basis. So if you can't deliver that, and the tours structurally can't deliver that, so the outcome, and we're looking at it through a sort of a very sort of naked investment lens, just like it's any other asset, then the money will demand, okay, I want to see McIlroy, Scheffler, Bryson, Brooks every other week, and we'll do it. It's a Formula One for golf, and then you get to what Live was supposed to be.
Yeah, indeed.
Maybe.
Speaking of the four names you just mentioned there, of course, was just to date when we're chatting here, a day or two after McIlroy, Scheffler, and Brooks and DeChambeau announced they're going to have this match. Is there any irony in the notion, Richard, that the President's Cup, which is coming up in a couple of weeks and is the PGA Tour's dream to rival the Ryder Cup, and there's lots of issues with that and people have suggested lots of solutions. In reality, they could trump the Ryder Cup tomorrow by announcing a 12-on-12 PGA Tour versus Live, couldn't they? That would be genuinely bold. And the interest in the McIlroy, Scheffler, Koepka, DeChambeau thing kind of tells you that, because you wrote a book called The Captain Myth, which touched on a lot of stuff about captains of Ryder Cup teams. What the Ryder Cup does, it taps into genuine ill feeling. McIlroy and Patrick Reed genuinely do not like each other. And when you make them play against each other in an important event like the Ryder Cup, you can get something genuinely special, like those first 8 holes that we got. We know they won't do it, but wouldn't the money say that's what golf wants right now? Play it in Adelaide too.
Not just the money. That's what people on my golf WhatsApp group want to see.
Yep.
As soon as that got announced, it's the money, and we talk about the money. We talk about private investments, whether it's private equity, whether it's John Henry, whether it's Saudi. The money wants what the people want. They're trying to chase the eyeballs. Now, there's no denying that golf is a tired product, and there's no denying that the tours face a real challenge. Everyone knows that. No one can deny that this job of trying to keep everyone happy under the tour model ain't working for us, the fans, and we ain't watching. And so that's a problem. When people like you and me ain't watching, week in, week out, the tour product, then that's a signal that there's something like Live, whether it's Live or PGL before it. The idea behind these things is actually very sound.
It is,
but the execution, I don't like. I just in terms of the way it's presented, the way they've done it, it's not for me.
No,
but there's definitely something in it.
Oh, sure, yeah. You only got to look at Adelaide, don't you?
Poking at the weakness of the tours.
Yeah, they've tapped into a real sentiment here in Australia. It's the sentiment you
just to answer your question, Rob. Just on the the Ryder Cup versus, the Ryder, the new Ryder Cup is Live versus the PGA Tour. And I wrote that on my newsletter today. It's interesting how for 20 odd years the President's Cups have been trotted out. No one's really given a toss.
Nope.
You can't confect these things.
You can. You have a 10-shot start at the Tour
of,
Championship, Richard. You can confect these things. You can have a handicap event at the final.
I think one of the problems, and this goes way beyond golf, but one of the problems of sport at the moment is that you've got what I call sport by McKinsey. So you've got clever people coming in and treating it and saying, right, okay, well, all we got to do is, and they're modeling formats and they're looking at, how they can manipulate viewership and capture audience for all the reasons we've talked about, just, to get as much money as they can. What they forget is us, we, the public and fans, are a pain in the arse. We're quite difficult
That's right.
people. And the Ryder Cup is the Ryder Cup because it's a strange thing. You wouldn't, if you try to create it, and they tried to recreate it, the President's Cup, and it's rubbish. Right. So it only started when, in 81, it's been going since 1927. Yep. It's only been relevant for a relatively short period of time. Yeah. Of course, people are saying, well, why don't we then recreate the Ryder Cup and do this and do that and the rest of it? But that's fine. But then you look at the team stuff that Liv is doing, or TGL, we'll come on to. The team concepts is just so daft. There is nothing there to get hold of. Yeah. So it's obvious in many ways. Teams, yes, we like supporting teams in lots of different sports, but don't assume that just because you're going to bung a few people together and create brands, I'm going to buy a bucket hat. I'm not.
And that's an important connection, isn't it? That's genuine fandom. People want to go and buy your merch because they support your team. And I think you had Rick Shields on your podcast last week. It was really interesting. He might be more influential than most of the PGA Tour players. In fact, he is, no question, as are a bunch of YouTubers. You're saying people consume golf differently. Rick Shields, Mark Crossfield, the No Laying Ups, the Fried Eggs. These are all examples of how people are consuming the game differently to what you and I grew up with way back then. I can't remember my point there.
I was at Troon, Rod. I was sitting at the Open at the practice ground on the Tuesday or Wednesday at Troon, and the best players in the world were hitting golf balls out on the range, and there was people just sort of sitting there, and it's all what it's like on a golf range on a Tuesday. It's people are chatting, and it's just all very low key. Rick Shields walked past, and the cameras came out, the phones came out, the autograph, shouting, "Get him over!" Just it's a different thing, and we have to take notice of that. Yep. He's having a different relationship with golf fans than the golfers. Yeah. It's not about performance. The golfers are about performance. Schauffele won, brilliant player. I followed it. I absolutely loved the Open this year. His relationship with his fans is about, he's a fantastic player. The golfers are brilliant. They're playing a game that, we're not familiar with, etc. The YouTubers ain't doing that, but they are bringing the game and talking in a way that talks directly to me, understands my weaknesses and my foibles, goes back to me as a 14-year-old on the municipal course in West London. I sense that he's from the same background, and he doesn't patronise me. And I don't feel out of my day. I don't feel like I'm looking at a god. Of course, every now and then I want to watch a tournament. I want to watch fantastic players hit 350 yards and blah, blah, blah. But actually, it's quite interesting what's happening.
It's not either or, is it? You're not either a tour fan or you're a YouTube golf fan. There's a huge crossover there. But certainly it feels like younger generations in particular, that the YouTube, that they're consuming most of their content there, which sort of suggests at some point tours will have to realise that's where you want your golf to be. If you want to be, you've got to put yourself in that market to be available for there. It'd be a tough time to run sport, and I think particularly golf, Richard. All of these media things, that's affecting all sports, and your own newsletter, and there are a bunch of others, people watching that and trying to figure out what's going to happen next. But golf's got an even bigger problem, hasn't it? Because it's not got we've argued about this before, I guess. To me, the golf fan base, the people who watch golf, play golf. If you don't play golf and you watch golf, there's something a bit odd. Outside of the Ryder Cup and the majors, perhaps, if you know what I mean. Week-to-week tour golf, that's a difficult concept to keep. I'm not sure it can survive as much as we play it at the moment into the future.
No, I agree.
Too many players, too many tournaments.
Yeah, the people who run the tours wake up and worry about their members.
Yeah.
They don't worry about me. They don't worry about you. We're a secondary thought. And if, you don't have to have a MBA to say, if I don't wake up worrying about the customer, then my business ain't going to be doing well. And, it's that's a extreme view. And I know the people, at the tours, and they're all very, professional people who really care about golf. It's not easy,
no,
but it's hard to see a route through as it is at the moment.
Yeah.
Just because of, it will be, there are lots of tours, aren't there, on, below
yes,
the PGA Tour and the European Tour. Well, no one cares about them.
No.
And that's the worry.
Players do. They're pathways for players. Smaller tours.
Of course.
Yeah, that's what they are. They're a way to climb all the way to the top. It's interesting. You mentioned this before. I go back to something I heard on one of your podcasts a long time ago. I think it was about soccer or football, as you call it over there. You had a guest on who said, and it was a bit of that McKinsey thinking that you're talking about. When we have the local derby of this team, that team, it always gets the biggest crowds and the biggest numbers. People love it. So the theory is, well, let's have more of that. And golf's in this at the moment. We want to see the best of the best all the time. I wonder if that's true. Your guest's point was, the thinking there is, well, these things are like trains. The more of them you put on, the more people will sort of fill them up. But it's not the case, is it? It's that's the thinking of the tour. The more tournaments they put on, the more playing opportunities they can sell to their members. But if nobody's watching them, sort of what's the point? Do we want the best against the best all the time? Or in fact, it was what sports fans want, the best golf, the best / football, the best / tennis, not regardless of who's playing it, but there's a whole bunch of characters who could fill that role. Doesn't have to always be Tiger and Rory and Scheffler and those things. Do you think that best of the best all the time is the right thinking? If you had the Olympics every year, would they be the Olympics? It's that question, isn't it?
Yeah. No, I think it's idiotic.
Good. I do too.
I did think. I'm a Spurs fan, and Spurs were in the Super League, but we were the last of the. We were the bottom.
Right,
of the
you were the PGA.
How we got on the Super League into the Super League is just beyond me and beyond every Spurs fan. But what's the point? So you're the sort of field that Real Madrid beats every now and then. And you sort of think, actually, it doesn't work. It's culturally, just there's so many reasons why it's a problem.
Yeah.
And we're banging against this whole thing all the time, which is the American model versus the European model of, European football is chaotic. It's relegation, promotion. It's impossible to invest. If you're a billionaire and you want to buy a football club, there are so many reasons not to do it. If you're a billionaire and you want to buy an NFL team, you could, it's been proven that you can't lose money. It's impossible to lose money. You could make every decision bad. You could make terrible decisions. Like the guy, Dan Snyder, I always call it the Dan Snyder effect. He came in, he made over 20 years, made some terrible decisions and walked away with a 10 times multiple profit. You just can't fail because it's a closed league and it's a closed ecosystem. If you buy Fulham or Spurs, it's different,
Is one better than the other?
The money, I keep calling it the money, but the investment community and sport is now, you often hear this phrase, sport is an asset class now. And so it's got lots of people coming in, and there's conferences about, the Financial Times runs a football business conference. It's full of people who want to buy football clubs. And that's fine, but the risk in buying a sports club outside of that closed US model is just probably unbearable for most investors. You just can't live with that sort of volatility.
Yeah. It's what's going to happen Richard. It feels like we're on the cusp of something, you know. All these things, it's a perfect storm. The changes in media and the way it's consumed and delivered, changing demographics of people, and I think we could generally accept young people, generally speaking, less interested in sport perhaps, or perhaps less interested in sport the way we were, sort of losing a bit of its luster. A tough time. What's going to happen? Do you think sport holds its place? I think this is, to me, sport's a pyramid like all businesses. If the top starts to get bigger or close to the size of the bottom, then the sport's in trouble. You look at what's happened in men's professional golf the last 3 years. They haven't surpassed the base, obviously, but that relationship's changed. The top's got a lot bigger over a bottom that probably hasn't grown much.
Okay, I disagree with your premise. I know a lot of people who run sports organizations. I know a lot of the people who work in sport. This is not an industry that is short of money. It's not an it's we've got to be realistic, and yes, there's going to be change, but I quite often think, okay, well, if you think that it's the bit in the middle between the fans, I don't see anyone turning off golf. I don't see golf. Okay, it will fluctuate in we can argue about participation numbers, and that's always an endless, fairly tedious debate. In terms of sort of the relative sort of participation base of a sport, but people still like sport and they still want to play it maybe differently than we did, but they want to consume it in some way. Now, whether or not someone gets paid an enormous, absurd amount of money for doing it because the media, television companies value it as a content, that's one question. If that person has to take a pay cut, is that the end of the world? I mean, I get it in terms of change and disruption, and we hear all the, there's a sort of energy, things have to evolve quickly, move fast, break things. You get all of that Silicon Valley meets Wall Street type, conversation. But actually people still love sport and they still want to watch it and play it. And I can't get excited about someone's going to have to take a 20% pay cut if they're already on enormous amounts of
absolutely,
money.
Yes.
Now, it's a different thing if you're then looking at the sort of broader Olympic pyramid, for example, where you've got people who don't make a lot of money and they are sort of struggling to just turn up and play. Let's try and find a way of giving them more money or giving them some support, but let's not worry too much about the PGA Tour. By the very fact that you're on the PGA Tour means you're a millionaire anyway.
That's right. Yeah. You can't. You might not be able to keep your job every year, but still.
We've been sold this idea that things endlessly grow.
Yes.
Which they don't.
It's an intriguing notion. On a planet of finite resources, it's an intriguing ideology to come up with, isn't it? Eternal growth. You wonder whether there's a disconnect there fundamentally that might be messing around with the systems and sort of.
Whose idea was this?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Want to work less and play more golf? Well, you can. If you're practicing your putting or your drives, Tiff Tough Hybrid Bermuda, exclusively by Lawn Solutions Australia, can bring the golf course experience right to your home. With superior drought tolerance, speedy recovery and toughness, Tiff Tough is the smart grass. For more information, visit lawnsolutionsaustralia.com.au. That's lawnsolutionsaustralia.com.au. We've touched on it a couple of times, the media and this changing media landscape. You've got a podcast, a sports business podcast network. I'm intrigued by this idea. Why podcasting and why has it worked? Because we're seeing the same thing in golf. Golf is now, well, you came on our State of the Game podcast many years ago when there were maybe, 10 or 50 golf podcasts total globally. There's hundreds now, literally, on top of YouTube channels and stuff. So the content's being produced. Obviously, some of it's being consumed. Why podcast? Where does my business is podcasting? Where does podcasting fit? And I'm interested on two fronts here, Richard. Why can you have a successful podcast network now about sports business, and that's all it's about?
Okay. Yeah, first of all, it is your fault, so I blame you entirely.
Thank you for your collection of microphones and other wasted money on technology that's shiny but you never get to use, yes.
So I think the simple answer is that's how we're consuming media. I'm my bit of my small bit of the jungle is the business of sport, and it's a B2B marketplace. So it's people selling business services to each other. So we are a sponsor and advertising based product. Now podcasts do a lot of jobs really, really well. One, there's the obvious, which is why we're all listening to podcasts and why there's so many of them, is that technology has enabled and changed our behavior. So we are now listening in the car, we're listening in the kitchen. We're just the tech has made it much easier. And so there's that. So that it's growing, it's going to be around forever. So why not? In our little space, in the sports business, it was a piece of, it was a bit of white space. No one else was really doing it, and thought I really enjoyed doing them. And I think there was a spot for us. So, why not? We kicked off doing that. It's a marketplace full of sort of magazine publishers and conferences and there's a lot of people. We're not short of people writing opinions and LinkedIn blogs and blah, blah. All of which is great. It's fine. And we thought, well, actually, we'll do a podcast. We'll get it going. Initially, the business model was going to be we'll have a podcast as a sort of editorial front for a consulting back end. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I'd just come out of a job at an advertising agency, and I was a sort of day rate consultant. And I thought that worked for a while, and I've got a business partner, Sean, who's, that was the idea initially, and so, but over time, the Trojan horse became the horse. So because the podcast became popular enough to monetize directly, and if you don't have to have clients, then don't have clients. Is my is the take out of this podcast. So there is it's fun. There's two of us. There's a sort of expanding team, and we've got events that we do, which are very popular. And there's newsletters and various other things, but the podcast is the sort of start. So if we've got an idea for something, we do a podcast on it and see if it's a really good gauge of audience demand. Yeah. It's a really good way of saying, right, okay, business of women's football. Is there anything in this? What do you think? In terms of, is there an audience there that will be listening? And if there is, then okay, there's potentially an event in that we then, get 100 people, 200 people in a room for an evening. So it gathers momentum, but it's quite a nice way of just very lightly touching on lots of different things. So our business covers all sports, every bit of the business of sport. Yeah. And we've got Wedge Issues, which is a sort of particular golf vertical product. And it's basically, the idea is that all the questions that we ask all the other sports, we're going to take and direct towards golf. Mm-hmm. And so, all the things that you've talked about audiences, media, sponsorship, investment, disruption, tech, private equity. Let's take all of those questions and
throw them at
ask
golf,
the people in golf,
and see what the answers are.
Yeah,
you like me come from a media background. You're a sort of a trained journalist. You've done all of that. Technology's changed the game of golf, but nothing might have been changed more than the media by technology. What you've described there is, it would be, it's too harsh a word, but it's almost an accidental success. You've built this empire of podcasts from a kind of a let's suck it and see what happens, and it's grown from there. You obviously bring some media skills and other things to that. Quite a few people in this space have no media background and have become extremely popular. What's your take from a media side, the content that gets created that people consume? We can see the world we're living in outside of golf politically and all of that turmoil. Do you see that in the sports world as well? What's your take as a sort of a journalist on the media, like how this is going to play out? Because well, No Laying Up and Fried Egg are two quite substantial businesses now. And both just started by blokes who just love the game.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of answers to that. One is I've got a question about, so we wanted unofficial partner to sort of be, I'm a journalist, and so I want to do sort of some journalism within this.
Yep.
And so you're asking questions. One of the things that, on the news, I write a newsletter, and that's much more my voice. That's much more opinionated. It's much more this is what I think, and, take it or leave it. Much more at that sort of, that end of things. I do think there is a limit in terms of I don't need to listen to just people talking hot takes about things and, just opinion-led stuff, because I think it's inevitable that you then have to become more and more extreme in your opinions just to keep going, just to keep interest. You have to come up with different opinions or just stronger and stronger opinions because that's what you think the audience wants to hear, and you become defined as this sort of, a radical voice in the whole thing. And actually, after a while, you think, okay, well, the problem with that is that you become a bit predictable and boring. And I think there's a sense that I hear a lot of that. I hear, that people move towards, there's almost like, you get dragged into sort of culture war nonsense, and you start to have positions that you think, actually, I couldn't give a toss, but also not, changing your mind is not a weakness. I do think that the thing that I enjoy is talking to experts and talking to people who know what they're talking about, or people who have just worked in doing something for a long time. That has a validity which is quite often underrated, and it should be respected. It doesn't mean that I agree with what they're doing. And I'm, one of the things we do a lot is criticize people in charge of sports, the sports business, the whole
sport in itself, isn't it, Richard? Criticizing sports leaders is its own sport.
I think, criticism is, I try and be fair. I try and be evaluated. I try not to be sort of prejudiced. It's impossible in some ways. You come with your own prejudices, and you want it to be entertaining as well. So there's a sort of, there's always a balance to be struck. But I veered away from sort of polemic stuff because I just find it a bit dull.
The Twitter back and forths and those kinds of things.
Yeah, and it's easy to sort of, sometimes you think, actually, you're having this opinion because you really think it, or you just think, I've got to have an opinion. It's Tuesday, I've got to have an opinion.
That's right. I've got a column to deliver. It's got to be about something. Shit. Here's an old chestnut that people get upset about. Religion, politics, and sex. Let's pick one of those. This is going to really annoy someone. That's exactly right. Somebody's going to write in and complain about it. Then everything will be all right. It's too broad a question. It's a bit silly. Is that healthy? Is it a healthy media time? The idealist in you says, yes, of course, everybody should have access to have their voice heard. And we have that now. Some people still get heard by more than others, but there is almost nobody left, well, certainly in the Western world, who doesn't have access to the internet and the ability to have their voice heard. Is that a healthy thing, Richard? It's not, I don't expect you to actually have an answer to that, but I just wonder whether others have sort of thought about that.
I think there's a sort of, we're at the point, I'm really thinking about, so Twitter, for example, I loved Twitter years ago.
So did I.
And I was on it all the time. I spent far too long on it. And I really liked it because it was, you would be you'd be thinking about saying a joke or something, and you think like an unexpressed thought. And then you thought, actually, it was somewhere that you could just write stuff, and it was, and then you got the sort of dopamine hit of, likes and retweets and things like that. And that was fine. And that was what it was for a while. And just the sense of it, I liked and you could follow who you liked, and, therefore it was all fine. It's changed. It's different now. And, we had, as you say, we had Rick Shields on. He said it was a cesspool. And he's probably right. I don't get much of that myself, but I do think that it has changed. And I don't care about people not agreeing with me. It's just the bots and all the nonsense, just people gaming the system.
Yeah.
So it's not so much, your point about the sort of democracy of opinion. I'm all for that.
Yeah.
But that's not what the platforms are now.
Yeah.
And so the reason we do podcasts, we've got our own audience, and the reason we do Substack, we've got a newsletter audience, which is quite considerable. It just means that we can talk to people, and we've got a WhatsApp group of people who are sort of guests. And so we've got a sort of private sports business Twitter of our own, which is a thriving community of people who are actually running things. And, and that's interesting, and I learn loads from that. And so my appetite for Twitter, I'm addicted to TikTok.
Really?
Particularly golf TikTok.
Wow.
Yeah. I can't stay off I've got to take it off my phone. It's just just golf instruction. I used to be addicted to golf magazines and instruction. And I think it's the same impulse.
But it's colour and light and movement.
Just stuff. Yeah. It's just crap, but it's not. Well, it's not crap. It's great, but it's just so much of it, Yeah. And the algorithm is so relentlessly accurate that I just get served, something for if I get served stuff about my takeaway, I get 20 things saying I'm doing it wrong.
And nothing helps a golf swing, Richard, like having 20 different tips about the backswing before you take your stance. That's how you get to 13.
Each time, and that's what I think on the first tee. I'm clocking all of them. I go through. I've got more swing thoughts than Bobby Clampett.
Outstanding.
Gen Z reference for you.
Outstanding stuff. I've often thought part of the appeal of podcasts, what you've outlined there about Twitter and what it used to be, one of the appeals of that was that you could disagree with people and actually get a thread of interesting, thoughtful back and forth about a topic. Whereas now you just get this flaming thing, and in 3 tweets you're at, well, you're a Nazi, and that's kind of the end of discussion. It doesn't really matter what you tell us what happens. Podcasts allow that, don't you? Some of my favourite podcasts that you've done have been with people that you clearly disagree with. And yet the civil conversation in a marketplace of ideas where you've got two people who believe what they believe, but they're civil and they're engaged and they're thoughtful and can accept position. Podcasts do that in a way that I don't know that anything else can. There's something about the human voice and conversation isn't there. It's different to television. And television shows that have been – we're seeing this now with podcasts. Everyone wants to make video, and they want to put their podcast on YouTube. I get it because it's a big platform. But in fact, a camera pointing at two people talking into a microphone is extraordinarily boring visually. You've got to do a lot to dress that up to make it Parkinson or something like that. The podcast allows you to eavesdrop at the bar, doesn't it? And if you get a good conversation, it can be really intriguing and just a fantastic way to spend an hour.
You have touched on something that I think about a lot and worry about a lot, which is video. And I suspect I've been played like a fool by people who are providing video services and the platforms who want to turn podcasts into video and all the rest of it. We've dabbled with video. I'm not very good at it. I don't like it. It doesn't add anything to my experience. I get the arguments. You need to be top of the funnel, dancing at the top of the funnel. I used to work for an ad agency. I understand the concept, but unless you're doing something that is specific to a particular channel, unless you're starting a TikTok channel and doing it authentically, if you start there, or if you start on YouTube, or if it's about Instagram or whatever, just taking a podcast and trying to cut it across all of these things, which is basically what we've been doing, it's not very good and it doesn't work, and it underplays. So, and you haven't got enough people or time to do it properly.
Well, the production difference between audio and video is extraordinary. I mean, you're talking 3, 4, 5 times.
To your point, to your first point, I think the reason I like podcasts is listening to interesting conversations. That's what it's about. And I think the video is a distraction. So you might have helped me talk myself out of it.
Well, of course, I'm in the worst possible position. I have a podcast studio where we're now sort of transitioning to doing more video and offering that service, but we're going to focus on plug for the
But secretly hating yourself.
Well, it's not so much. In fact, I'm quite happy with this. You can see that video clips definitely work as a promotional tool for podcasts. People see on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever, two people talking into microphones for 40 seconds and saying something interesting. I'd like to hear the rest of that. That works. That's a promotional clip. You don't want to watch that whole thing. So we've got this hybrid idea where that's what we'll provide. The
No, I get it.
Clips come as part of the service.
You know, you're right. And we don't see much uptick from video. It might be because the videos are shit, but there's a sort of, you know, we don't see much of a response, and actually the what we get is it's been 5 years, you know, and it's been a sort of steady increase, and very little has gone viral. There's been a few, like recent ones we did about Man City and football that got onto Man City fan Twitter, and it went bananas, you know, but it's largely irrelevant. You know, the number was enormous, but actually, who cares whether, you know, some fan in Man City or Manchester is watching it? That's not. It doesn't. What does it do? It's not. They're not coming back.
It's the same temptation we have with pizza, isn't it, Richard? Oh, I like mushrooms. I like salami. I like bacon. I like beef. Let's put all of it on a pizza. That'd be the best pizza in the world. And in fact, it's almost invariably the worst, isn't it? What you really want is one or two of those ingredients together. And that's enough. But the temptation is always to keep overloading. And I think we're in that period sort of with podcasts. And I wanted to ask you specifically about Wedge Issues, your podcast you mentioned before, which is a golf specific one. Why golf? Why did golf get a Guernsey? Is it just because you like it, or is there something interesting enough or different enough about the golf business that makes it worth talking about more in depth?
Well, both of those things are true. First of all, I really like it. Secondly, about 10, 15 years ago, you might remember there was a thing called the KPMG Golf Business Forum, and that was an event that sort of obviously run by KPMG, and it then became, I think IMG bought it, and it became the HSBC Golf Business Forum. And I used to do some work. First of all, I used to go as a sort of guest, and then I was doing sort of content. I would do, you know, mapping out what they should be talking about, and so basically a content strategy for it. And this is a long time ago, but it struck me then that it's a very underserved market in terms of the business of golf, and there is. And that remains the case.
That's true, yeah. Agreed.
And there's also from my point of view, there's an audience question here in terms of the people that listen to Unofficial Partner. Is, you know, there are people, they're across sport, but there are particular, you know, they fall into certain categories. It might be people on the rights holder side, i.e., you know, people like the PGA Tour or the European Tour, or it might be sponsors who are running sponsorship, or, you know, there are different categories of people. Whereas the golf business is broader. It gets into other things like tourism. It gets into, you know, I remember, so John Deere tractors, you know, or people who make grass. They were one of the great sort of mismatches. One of those events was I got Ed Smith down to Abu Dhabi to do a talk about something or other. And, you know, Ed Smith, former sort of England cricket selector, very, very, very bright, you know, guy. But I looked out at the audience and it was a load of sort of tractor salesmen from, you know, and they weren't interested in what Ed had to say, frankly.
So any of this going to move tractors? I need to move tractors. Like, tell me how to move tractors. I don't care about this big idea.
What's this bloke talking about? So there's but the central point was it's a sort of different, broader audience. I'm a big fan of. I think the internet, essentially, I think success on the internet is about niches, and I think that you know the sports business is obviously a niche of sport, and then once you can't go almost too deep. So you know we've got a podcast called Other People's Money, which is about investment in sport. We've got one about sponsorship. We've got one about creative in sport. So golf is a vertical all in its own right, and it's a trial that we're doing it. I'm doing it personally because I really like golf, and I don't want anyone else to do it because it's too much fun. There are others that we've got on the track that other people will probably host, and there'll be more sport specific. We had a go with rugby. That we'll probably have another go at that. The problem is that, and you just play around with models. We had so Will Greenwood, the rugby player, England rugby player, and there was an idea that we were going to do that together. And the problem is, as soon as you start getting famous rugby players or footballers involved, it changes things a bit. And
managers, Richard, and reputations. We've got nothing to protect. Our reputations aren't worth protecting. But if you're a professional, famous sports person, exactly, you don't want to be associating with the likes of us. We kind of got off golf, and I did want to ask you just to finish up. We're all aware of the Live Golf PGA Tour thing. Where do you think it's going to end up? There is a theory that, in fact, all the negotiations that are going on are really about a backdoor way of having billionaires from America tap into the public investment fund of Saudi Arabia via a channel, a vehicle that looks like that's not what they're doing. Are you a believer in that? Is that a conspiracy theory, or what do you see happening? It's all the way it's all unfolded is extraordinarily strange. None of it makes any sense. I can't believe we're here, which is nowhere still.
Yeah, I mean, on the first one, I'm not sure. I think there's a whole, trying to trace whose money is in PIF. Good luck with that, And if John Henry wants to move his money into different places, then chances of us tracing it are,
he has people to take care of that, Richard.
I think, So I'm less about that. There might be something in it, but
who cares?
Yeah. There's the other bit in terms of how we got here and why we're here, and I can see how we got here. And as we said at the beginning, there is a need for something, and this isn't it. And I've sort of said before that the problem with Live is that it might be around for a very long time. It might just hang around. I mean, this idea that it was going to come in, disrupt golf, create this enormous moment, and everything will be different and everything will be better. It might not work like that, and it might just be that you've got this division, so they need to solve it because it's really clogging up everything. And to the extent that we had Ben Sharp on, who runs Callaway now, and he's saying, well, look, you've got to sort it, because it gets down to which players am I going to sponsor next year? Who's going to be playing what? Just on a micro level, everyone is looking up, and the whole thing is stuck.
Yeah.
So they have to work out what it is. Now, whether what it is two worlds, and they all just meet up at the majors. There's so much bad blood. The PGA Tour, we mentioned at the beginning about the this new sort of televised event, the PGA Tour versus Live thing. There's something in that which feels significant, because that's just, that hasn't happened without each of the players. There is a division on the PGA Tour side with McIlroy on one side and Cantlay on the other, and they've got all their proxies, but they've also got their proxies in the investment marketplace where, they put money into TGL teams and they put money into, Live teams or whatever. So there is a lot of money, and there's a lot of people who are sort of fronting that and have made big bets. So it's not just about, the front end, which is the bit that we care about, the entertainment layer. There's a whole sort of business conversation behind the scenes that's happening, and that's the bit that's intractable. And I was at the Open at Troon, and now that's 6 weeks ago probably, and the story was that they were, I talked to Jay Monahan and Guy Kinnings was in the room, and all the conversations was, it's happening this week. We have, heads are being banged together. There's all the 5 families are meeting behind the scenes, etc., etc. But still, we don't hear anything. So it's frustrating for everyone.
Yeah, it's a mess. It's just, this has happened in other sports, of course, this notion of a disruptor league. Golf's unique in many ways. How have other sports sort of recovered from this, Richard? What's the path forward? Can we take any lessons from other sports? We had Super League here in Australia that started, big division. We had one-day cricket when it came here in Australia, and World Series cricket and those things. Any lessons there for golf? Or is it too different a sport, too different a model to take much?
I think it's sort of it's a good question. I don't know what the lessons are, actually. the obvious counter over here is the Super League, which failed in a weekend because of public opinion. A lot of the clubs didn't want it. It was a reputation thing. The golfers who went to live have gone through that now, so they're through the other side of that. They don't get, there was that first period where you had those really awkward press conferences where they were talking about human rights, and Westwood and Poulter were just looked completely nonplussed and out of their depth. That sort of seems to have moved. So I don't know because when you look at things like, even going back to Packer, there was a settlement and things came back, the players came back, and from our point of view, there might have been grumbling behind the scenes of, they took the money and I didn't. But I can't see a sort of direct parallel because of the sheer amounts of money, but also the source of the money. Yeah. It's just so vast that it's really hard to say that they're going to give up, because I don't know. The only thing that strikes me is whether or not, if you go back to why PIF are doing it, or why the Saudi, the money is doing it, and whether it's working, and whether or not just persistently being the sort of outsider is working for them in the big plan. I have no idea. It's interesting that they are showing up in tennis very differently than they do in golf. So they're doing similar things in, not the same, but PIF is become, they're sort of fronting press conferences, and their brand is out there now in terms of next to the WTA. So it's a different strategy, and it feels like they've learned from the live experience. I think they must feel quite bruised by it. They compare how live and PIF look via the golf lens. It's being chased around the golf course by Dan Rowan of the BBC, and it looks very shifty, and what's wrong, this is dirt. The money is running away from the microphone. Whereas now they're doing press conference. They've even got a sports news channel. They've got a whole, so they're trying to get ahead of, just from reputation wise, the bad stuff. So who knows? Should
the moral question be a question? Firstly, and secondly, could you make the case that if what they're attempting to do is this, what we broadly call sports washing, that it's worked? Because you're right, that only has so much legs as a single issue, the moral thing. And that ran out of legs after a few months for the PGA. It was one of the fundamental strategic errors they made. Should have been part of the mix of things that they talked about, but they really went hard on that in the 9/11 fans. People get bored with hearing it's just the same thing over and over, and so if Liv sticks around for 3-4 years, we don't talk about that. It'll never stop completely. We don't talk about it so much anymore, do we? They've most people just come, look, forget about that. What do we think about the golf aspect of it? It's sort of happened, hasn't it?
Yeah, it sort of has. I think there's what happens is you get to these sort of moral equivalencies that people sort of, well, what about, American executions, or what about, so, and that I think is again part of a strategy. They like that. They want that noise. They want that, because most people won't engage with the details. So most people will come away and say, yeah, but they're all, it's like politicians, they're all up to it. Exactly right, yeah. So we don't care about any of it.
Apathy's fantastic.
And that actually that works as a comms strategy. So, and you're right in that the sort of vehemence of those initial press conferences, and particularly, and Jay Monahan's statements, and those have all been toned down. Monahan, you got to remember that, the sort of loop that he's been on with, doing CNN interviews with the guy from PIF, and it was all sort of, we're friends now, and then it's private equity, John Henry deals, and, that sort of put the Saudis back up again. So it's a right old palaver, and again, it's not easy with the same people in post to work out how it moves forward.
Especially now that the lunatics, for want of a better term, are in charge of the asylum, with the players essentially having taken over the tour. That essentially Tiger and this band are really driving what the PGA Tour does now. That's a very dangerous. I don't care who you are. If you're a lunatic, you shouldn't be allowed to run the asylum, whether you'd be good at it or not. It should just be a rule, shouldn't it? That's how.
It's very hard to sort of construct an argument for that. Quite often people say players should have a real voice at the table, and I get it, but no. they're so short term. It's the lens is so short term that it's very difficult to make that case. I think
indeed. Rich, it's been fabulous to catch up with you. Business is much more interesting than people give it credit for, and you do a fabulous job of exploring that interest in the sports business world, and particularly in the golf world with wedge issues, which I highly recommend to everybody. I particularly enjoyed the interview with Tom from Callaway. You said Tom?
Ben Sharp.
Ben Sharp, sorry, yes. He was fantastic, I thought, and really open and quite forthright for a head of a major company who need to think carefully about what they say. Well, it was sort of interesting
because actually it was the sort of, the following week I see today that they've separated from Topgolf, which was part of the conversation that we were having, and which again, from a business point of view is an interesting story in its own right, but he's great. He's good value. Yeah,
perfect. Well, recommend everybody go and have a listen to Wedge Issues. There's I think 4 episodes now, 3, 4, once a month, is it?
Yeah, quite a few coming up as well.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to all of them. We thank you for taking some time today, mate. It's always great to catch up, and it has been again today. Thanks very much.
And you, mate. Cheers.
Small ball, big business. That feels like the takeaway from that chat, and a big thanks again to Richard for taking the time to be a part of it. Well, that's it for episode 126, but make sure you're following the pod so that you never miss an episode, including our next guest.
I couldn't believe how competitive they were and how much they wanted to beat the Americans. It was just, the power of that was incredible.
That's former Ryder Cup player and European Tour winner Peter Baker, next time on The Thing About Golf.